Well, hello, Steiff superfans, and welcome to October's special Steiff seminar series. This month, we are talking about field and forest friends. Many of us love to spend the fall, the autumn season walking around outside field and forest, looking at the beautiful trees and the seasons changing. So I thought it would be a lot of fun to take a deep dive into four of Steiff's most beloved field and forest characters over the past century. What I'm about to show you is for informational and educational purposes only, and I hope you really enjoy it. So the field and forest category has been a really popular one at Steiff, really since the beginning of the company's founding at the turn of last century and even before that. Here you can see an illustration from a late 1930s or early 1940s catalog featuring many of the beloved field and forest characters. And here is a later illustration. This is a postcard, probably from the late 50s or early 60s, showing a forest scene. This is the Waldy the hunter and two lovely little fawns. I think Waldy may have had a nibble or too much of the mushroom that you see here on the right, but he's taking a nap in the forest and enjoying a beautiful day. So we're going to take a deep dive into what I think are the four most interesting, at least very popular at my store and with other collectors, four field and forest characters, and we're going to look at the history of them and how their designs have evolved over time. And those four field and forest friends are squirrels, deer, foxes, and bugs, because it wouldn't be a walk unless there were a few bugs in the air to swat around. We're going to look at these items over a period of four groupings of years, the four quarters of the 20th century, the Q1 being 1900 to 1925, Q2 being 1926 through 1950, Q3 being 1951 through 1975, and Q4 being 1976 to 2000, because these years really help delineate major changes in design and influences at Steiff in terms of materials and production and presentation. So let's start with squirrels, and it's easy to see why. These are amongst the most popular items that I collect and sell in terms of these beautiful animals. They're very charming and endearing, and my husband and I always look for these on our walks in the fall and other times of the year. So the earliest squirrels that I'm going to share with you today from the first quarter. You see here a squirrel tumbler, and that's a lovely little velvet squirrel holding a nut with a mohair tail. He's on a wooden base. It's like a giant weeble. It's a tumbler. This particular item was featured at the Margareta Steiff House Museum in Gingen, Germany. So clearly it was a favorite design of hers as well. And here on the right, you can see a little squirrel. He is velvet, of course, with his mohair tail. You can see his prominent button. And he happens to be a rattle, which is not unusual for items that are this small size, but you can see this beautiful early and classic design. Also from the first quarter, here on the left, a squirrel pincushion, and he is sitting on some leaves. I believe they're felt. This could also have been an ink wipe, meaning that you could take your pen and take the tip and put it between these layers and clean that off. The squirrel is holding a little nut, and you can see a similar construction with his velvet body and mohair tail and great white ear tag and button. Isn't that wonderful? Here on the right is another squirrel from the same general period. He is made out of two colors of felt. You can see that that texture and that contrast. He's holding a nut with that wonderful tail. Steiff seems to love these bushy tails on squirrels. It really makes them who they are. Also from the first quarter, here's another felt squirrel from 1910 holding what looks to be a velvet nut. He's more of an orange color. And here on the right appears to be a squirrel. I believe he's made out of velvet with a really long, bushy mohair tail. He was uncatalogued. He's holding what looks to be a pom-pom nut. Just beautiful, lovely, elegant, early designs. Moving along to the second quarter, about 1926, 1950, here are some of the designs that were very popular when it came to Steiff's squirrels. They became more lifelike and jointed, and you can see in these three examples here, this little squirrel here on the left is jointed with the wonderful mohair construction. The one here on the right from 1925 through 1934 a very more playful. You can see how the designs have become a little bit more childish and youthful and playful. The squirrel pictured on the upper right is an uncatalogued tipped mohair version. And tipped mohair, especially in these wonderful, vibrant colors, including this orange, was a popular and beloved fabric treatment and presentation in the mid to late 20s through the mid to late 30s. Also from Q2, a wonderful velvet squirrel with the mohair tail. He's a little bit more austere looking than the previous models. You consider the time in which he was produced. Fabrics were a little more scarce, and things were a little bit more economically challenged at Steiff, so things were a little more simplified. And speaking of simplified, if you look at here on the right, you'll see a woolen miniature squirrel. He is made out of wonderful yarns of different lengths and textures and colors. He has felt ears, and these woolen miniatures did appear in the early 1930s as a direct result of economic conditions and the marketplace. These were produced to be made inexpensively and quickly, easy to pack and ship, and relatively inexpensive to purchase to keep people interested in these wonderful collectibles and products during a challenging economic time. Shortly after the company resumed toy making business after the war in the late 40s to early 50s, of course, squirrels came on the scene again. And there's two squirrels that you see here on the left, the squirrel from 1949 to 1956, in both a brownish and a tannish. These were a very similar design to the pre-war models, and they usually are holding a velvet nut, and sometimes they lose that nut, with these delightful long mohair tails and tipped ears. And the squirrel that you see on the far right is made out of velvet. This came in brown and gray velvet. Wonderful airbrushing detail, wonderful bushy mohair tail, and a delightful begging position. He's just beautiful. And to find a velvet squirrel from this period in nice condition with his IDs is very rare, because they are quite beloved, weren't made for a long time, and tend to discolor over time given their materials. Some other squirrels from the third quarter of the 20th century. Posse squirrel came out in 1957, and this was produced in both a brownish and a grayish tones in several sizes. Adorable in a begging position. The squirrel you see here in the middle is a woolen miniature squirrel, and is sort of the next generation of the earlier version that we saw that was brown and with the felt ears. And this particular one has a pom-pom body, a mohair tail, little felt limbs, and he's holding a red pom-pom nut. And here on the right, you see Perry squirrel. Perry was one of the most prolific post-war items in the line. Very, very popular. Was produced in collaboration with Disney and had a co-branded tag with Disney on his chest tag. This beautiful little fellow was made in a number of sizes, with the larger sizes holding a velvet nut. He had delightful oversized eyes and a big bushy tail. Just a beautiful squirrel. Here is a mystery squirrel from the third quarter of the 20th century. This is one of the highlights of my collection. I really have no idea who this guy is or why he was made. The only reference I can find to him was in a 1968-1969 F.A.O. Schwartz catalog, where he was pictured along with an edible dormouse with the caption of "Furry Friends." So this guy probably was produced as an exclusive for F.A.O. Schwartz, are produced in very limited quantities. But he's just beautiful. He's got double thick felt hands and a darling expression. Here you can see a postcard from about 1960. Around this time, Steiff took some of its most popular items and produced a series of postcards, putting these items in vignettes that were very lifelike and very fun and very playful. Here you can see a couple of posses, two small ones and a medium one, having a feast. Very delightful, very charming, and a great way that Steiff got out images and its reputation on its beautiful field and forest products. And moving along to the fourth quarter of the 20th century, from 1975 through 2000, items became a little bit more playful, a little bit more designed for children. For the most part, they were made out of soft materials, often synthetics, and stuffed with polyfill instead of Excelsior. And here you can see Keki Squirrel on the left begging, and a newer version of Posse. Posse was updated in the 80s, and here he is on all fours. He used to be in a more begging position, but absolutely beautiful squirrels, and still beloved and still collectible, and a fine point in any collection. Now we're going to talk about deer. Deer is the second category of field and forest products, and nothing says a wonderful walk and a successful walk through the field and forest without spotting one of these beautiful, beautiful beasts. So the earliest deer Steiff produced from 1900 through the 1925 period are very basic and very primary looking, a very endearing look to them. This deer on the left from 1901 through 1909 is lying, and he is made out of velvet, and he is from the Margaretta Steiff House Museum. You can see his felt antlers. Here in the middle, a row pincushion. He is made out of velvet, airbrushed, and on a pincushion. Steiff often put lying items or sitting items on pincushions at the first quarter of the 20th century and a little bit beyond that, but a beautiful and elegant presentation. And here is a very early deer on the right from 1899 through 1910, and you can see he's got his proud antlers. Jumping to the second quarter, looking at these fine deer from 1926 through 1950. Here on the left, you can see a woolen miniature fawn from 1935 through 1938. Again, we've seen a number of woolen miniatures. The squirrel that we saw dated from roughly the same time. I know that this particular item was given as an engagement present from a man to a woman in the mid-1930s, and she accepted, and they lived happily ever after. So there's part of the magic of Steiff. The fawn here that you see in the middle is from 1934 through 1943. And this beautiful little guy was actually made with his limbs extended. It was produced that way, but the limbs were lined in a wire that's posable, and that wire was just flipped under. So his limbs are actually tucked underneath him in a very authentic way. This is the way you would see a fawn in the forest that was just hanging out and resting. And here in the upper right, you see a lovely deer made out of an orange tipped material. Again, this material is very typical to the period, sort of an orange tipping to it on a tan base. And this guy is from about 1929 through 1935, typically appeared on wheels, but this example does not have wheels and has no indication of ever having them. More deer from the 30s and such. Here on the left, you'll see two fawns, and they have these mohair bodies and velvet legs. And I believe one of the reasons that they were constructed this way is not only because they are beautiful and look quite lovely this way, but mohair was really hard to get and very expensive at the time of their production. And by producing the legs in velvet, they were able to be more efficient with the fabrics. Here in the middle is a roebuck from 1936 through 1943. And next to him is his doe from 1938 through 1943. And these were made out of wool plush, which is another typical wartime fabric. But in this case, the fabrics really interpreted well to helping these items come to life in a most beautiful and authentic way. Jumping to the third quarter of the 20th century, here you see a deer family, and these were made entirely out of wool plush. You can see their lovely coloring, their earnest expressions, very high quality. In this case, again, the wool plush gives them a really beautiful and realistic look. You see beautiful pink ear brushing in the ears. And these guys would have had their US zone tags sewn into the front or rear leg seam to indicate that they were produced during this early post-war era. Other third quarter deer from Steiff include this delightful fawn here on the left, made out of artificial silk plush. This material also was produced just before and just after war on items such as this generally tended to have a beautiful glossy look for a little bit and then tends to get a little beat up looking quickly. So it's not unusual to find artificial silk plush items that look a little worn with a lot of playwear to them. Here, the roebuck in the middle, beautiful, proud item with gorgeous horns, gorgeous airbrushing, and a really distinctive look and personality. This guy's quite large and really is a beautiful focal point in a fall display. And of course, the fawn here on the far right is made out of velvet from 1949 through 1972, a very popular and prolific item, very beautiful, beautifully constructed, and looks adorable posed with dolls from any era. Other popular deer of the era, again, that third quarter of the 20th century, this lying fawn with her beautiful outstretched legs and body, very earnest look, tiny little thing, fits in the palm of your hand, and looks adorable posed with dolls. Bambi from 1951 through 1972, like Perry the squirrel, was a popular Disney collaborative project, and you can see the word Bambi on her chest tag and co-branded with Steiff and Disney. She has lovely velvet construction with mohair chest and a mohair fanny and lovely airbrushing. And here on the right, you can see a doe produced a little bit later on in the 70s and such. Her body is also made out of mohair, but her ears are lined in uh, Draylon, and she has velvet ears, again, sort of reflecting the period in which she was made. Steiff made a number of studio pieces as deers, especially in the 1960s era. And here you can see the studio deer family from the 1968 catalog, the mother, the father, and the baby. Very adorable threesome. Here's a studio stag from the 1968 catalog. Take a look at those antlers. What a proud presentation. Lovely, beautiful, and enormous. You would need almost a whole room to display this guy. And the studio fallow deer from 1968, so a younger deer with his antlers just coming in. Again, a beautiful and well-rendered, almost life-size deer from the Steiff line, representing the finest of its field and forest production. And jumping to the fourth quarter from 1975 to 2000, again, like we saw with the squirrels and such, these items generally tend to be a little bit more designed for play with children, made out of fabrics and materials that are either washable or very durable, stuffed with a polyfoam instead of excelsior and such. Some interesting ones I pulled out for you. This prototype deer on the left was made in the 1980s or so, and it sold for about $2,500 in July of 2019 at auction. And it's a really unusual fabric, look, texture, and such, and I can see why a collector just had to have it. This curled up fawn in the middle, very typical design of the period, sort of a sleeping companion. This would look adorable on a child's pillow or as a bedtime companion, soft and loving. And this little fawn here on the right is made out of Trevia velvet and with ears lined in Draylon and such. And again, very reflective of the period in which it was made, and probably made for more fun and play than collecting on a shelf. Now let's move on to foxes. And foxes are probably the most popular field and forest animal that I know about. We sell a tremendous amount of these on the store, and I also just love them. Steiff has done a fabulous job rendering these over the years. Let's look at the earliest Steiff foxes from the turn of last century, and here you can see a selection of them. The ones on the top are sitting, and the ones on the bottom are fully jointed. And these are designed based on what is known as what's called the teddy bear face. If you look at just the face of these wonderful foxes, you can see how they could easily be also a teddy bear, very endearing, very beautiful. And it is my understanding that Margaretta Steiff just loved this fully jointed fox design, these from 1909 through 1933, came in a number of colors and sizes. And what I've been told is that she loved this design so much that when she went on visits to friends and family and professional visits, she would bring one of these as a house gift or a professional gift to share her love of this item, as well as show the beautiful quality of the Steiff line at that turn of last century. But just beautiful foxes. Here are some foxes that generally represent what was happening in the second quarter of the 20th century. Steiff made a puppet, a hand puppet of these foxes, and here you can see one that dates probably from the 30s and such. Here is an uncatalogued display fox on the right. This guy was actually my roommate at Steiff when I worked there a couple of years ago. He is sitting and he's wearing this wonderful purple tipped coat. We think he's from about the 1920s. He's not cataloged. Steiff was thinking of making him as a replica, but he was very complicated and very expensive. So they passed on the opportunity, and this item was later sold at Christie's at the 2010 Steiff event there. And he is just a beautiful and very important Steiff fox from this period. Here are some beautiful novelties from the second quarter of the 20th century. A woolen miniature fox wearing his little slippers and his delightful hat and gun. He's just a darling, and he would fit in the palm of your hand, perfectly of the period, of the woolen miniature period. And here you can see a fox on wheels, which was produced through the 1930s. And again, with the teddy bear face, he's on eccentric wheels. That means the wheels are off center, and when he's pulled along, he bobs up and down as a real fox would do in the wild. Moving right along to the third quarter, this is immediately post-war from 1951 through 1976. You can see here on the left Steiff's fox. It was simply named Fox from 1950 through 1957. Beautiful standing fox. The larger sizes were head jointed. That would fox would be replaced in 1960 with a named fox named Zori, and you can see Zori here on the right. He's standing as well. Zori was also sort of his design was based and repurposed as a sitting desert fox. And you can see Zori here on the bottom, on the right. And Zori has sort of, the desert fox has larger ears and a slightly different expression and construction, but clearly of the same fox family, just beautiful. And here on the left, you can see an uncatalogued version of Zori. So on the left, he is made out of Draylon. He was typically made out of mohair, but sometimes Steiff would experiment with different fabrics on different items. And I happened to find this little guy and have him in my collection, a very special little tiny Zori desert fox made out of Draylon. Here are a few novelty foxes from the third quarter of the 20th century. This nightcap fox, this little guy is made out of Draylon. He has a felt body. It's empty, sort of hollow like a tent, and you would put a coin or a candy or something like that on a child's pillow and put this over it to hide it. It's almost like a tooth fairy kind of activity, but absolutely darling. And these nightcaps were made in a number of different styles, including field and forest characters, including some rabbits also appeared as nightcaps. This Steiff Fixili fox from 1950 through 1954, he's a hunter. You can see the beautiful fox face. He's in a typical Tyrolean hunting outfit. And he was produced also with a female companion who's even rarer than he is. I yet to find one for my collection, but they did come as a couple. And here on the right is the FAO Schwarz Red Fox, very exclusive product made for 1 year only, in this wonderful, giantly, excitingly red fabric. Very hard to find. I've only handled a handful of these in my entire collecting career, and probably one of the most interesting FAO Schwarz Steiff collaborations of the era. A few more delightful foxes for your eye candy purposes. This FAO Schwarz Zori display fox from 1962 through 1971 is extraordinarily realistic and very playful and very fun. I actually display mine in the fall in my front bay window because he loves to look out at the fall seasons and always gets people smiling and waving back at him. But he's just lovely. He's almost 3 feet tall and a wonderful presentation. And here on the right, you see Cozy Zori Fox, a sleeping version of the Zori Fox made out of Draylon. Most collectors aren't that interested in Draylon, but this particular design is pretty rare and really adorable and very well rendered. So collectors seem to like this wonderful little fox as well. And moving on to the fourth quarter, here you can see very typical Steiff foxes of the time, much like we saw in the other categories. These are really designed for children. They're made out of soft plush. They're stuffed with a foam material. They're built for play and built for love, more so than for collecting on a shelf, but some people do that as well. Simply beautiful and adorable. Now, it wouldn't be a walk in the woods without bugs. So I had to put this in to not only make you feel funny and feel good, but also appreciate this fine line of underrepresented items in the Steiff line from the field and forest category. So here you have some early first quarter bugs. You'll see here on the top a May beetle on wheels, and you see these items are primarily made out of felt and velvet. The ladybug here on the left is pictured. She is featured in the Margareta Steiff House Museum, and she's quite lovely. She might have even been used as a pincushion. And this beetle pincushion here on the lower right looks to be made out of velvet, maybe on a felt base. Just beautiful as well, and a great example of bugs of all things in the Steiff line. For the second quarter of the Steiff production, really focused on a number of very playful items. And here you can see from 1938 through 1943, woolen miniature beetles. Aren't these adorable? These guys are standing and they're wearing little slippers. I think we saw similar slippers on the Hunter Fox when we talked about that woolen miniature a few slides back. But these guys are in sort of a standing or begging position with their arms outreached. Their pom-pom bodies, little antenna and eyes. The heads are actually posable. You can move them to the left and the right. Totally adorable. It's to find a Steiff bug, beetle, um, ladybug in slippers from this era is very rare. They're extremely ephemeral. The shoes tend to fall off, and they just get played and loved as they should. Here you can see on the bottom a mohair ladybug pull toy. Just adorable, and a child would toddle this along with them. Imagine that today posed with a doll. How adorable would that be? Here you can see a late 1920s image of some Steiff bugs. This lucky, lucky white teddy bear gets to ride upon a riding ladybug with her tires and such. And here you can see some beetles and some smaller ladybugs on the ground enjoying the celebration. Jumping to the third quarter, 1951 through 1975, bugs also made a strong showing. Here you can see some woolen miniature ladybugs and a woolen miniature beetle. Not surprising, those would be perfectly interpreted by this woolen miniature technique that Steiff had perfected and marketed so well. Here you can see Nellie Snail, who's sort of a bug and sort of not, but I wanted to include her. She's got a wonderful construction. During this time, the late 50s to early 60s, Steiff did several products and with some very interesting materials that really aren't traditional for toy making. Rubber. This particular snail has rubber antennas. Her bottom is made of naga hide. She has velvet, and her shell is either rubber or plastic, depending on exactly when she was produced. And she came in sort of a brownish version and a bluish version that you see here. And here on the bottom, you see Spidey spiders. These were made in two sizes that you see here. The smaller one had very ephemeral pipe cleaner legs, and it's very hard to find one today that retains his pipe cleaner legs. The larger one had mohair legs, and you see how beautifully these are airbrushed and finished to keep their designs as interesting and playful and appealing as possible. Collectors love everything you see on this page. Some more bugs from the third quarter of the 20th century. These riding ladybugs and a riding beetle. How fun would that be to toddle around or even display today dolls and bears with? And here you can see on the right a sitting ladybug. And this was actually designed for a child to sit on or lean against while watching TV. And if you think about the time in which this was produced from started in the early 1960s, that's what kids did. That was what kids really enjoyed to do. It was very novel, very fun to sit and watch TV. And here was a Steiff companion to keep you company and to keep you comfortable. And finally, the fourth quarter bugs. And these, again, very playful, very fun, very silly, and really designed to enjoy in a playful way. Probably my favorite bug, maybe even of all time, is this caterpillar from 1980 through 1983. She's a foot, maybe a little bit longer, made out of a really long, funky colored plush. And she rides upon these 8 wheels. They're giant red balls. They're asymmetrical, like eccentric wheels. So when you pull her, she literally wiggles and jiggles. Very fun, very funny little caterpillar pull toy. Here on the bottom left, you see Flappy Fly, because everybody needs a fly in their collection. Cozy Flappy was made in a number of different color combinations. He was made in bright red, so it looks like an evil devil fly in that color combination. But here you see him in sort of a green and blue combination. And of course, on the right is a Cocili snail, probably the distant cousin of Nellie we saw a few slides back, but clearly soft and beautiful and really made for play. Well, that's what I have for you. I hope you enjoyed our walk through the woods with some highlights of some of Steiff's finest products that represent the field and forest category. I hope you have a good fall, a good autumn. I want to thank you, Teddy hugs, and take good care. And of course, it takes a village to raise a child, and it takes lots and lots of people and lots of support systems to put together a presentation like this. And these are the folks that helped make it happen. So I'd like to thank them for their images and ideas and inspirations.